So now, again, it's a pleasure to welcome Dr. Alistair Ayton, who is a trustee of the Society and assistant editor of the journal. Alistair did his doctorate at St Andrews University, looking at aspects of the Crown involvement in the March of Lords, in March of Lordships and the March of Wales in the middle part of the 13th century, which I think, as most people know, is a period of great interest to myself. And so very much looking forward to Alistair's talk on Roger Mortimer and the English crown in the reign of Henry III. Thank you, Alistair.
No, thank you. Thank you very much for that very generous introduction, Philip. It's very kind of you. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, fellow Mortimer History Society members. It's lovely to see so many of you here this morning, where I'm going to be talking to you about the Mortimers of Wigmore, actually specifically along the theme that we've just heard of troublesome young men from Steve, about Roger Mortimer, Lord of Wigmore. So without any further ado, I shall jump straight in. So here we have a letter from the King of England, Edward I, dated 31st of October, 1282. And this is within days of the death of our man, Roger, Lord of Wigmore, who died at his manor of Kingsland on the 27th of October, 1282. And I'll now read directly from the letter. Request that he, that is Roger, son of Roger, will so conduct himself against the king's Welsh enemies in the parts where his father was captain of the king's garrisons, that the king, so far as lies in Roger's power, may seem to recover to some extent in the son what he has lost in the father, and so that the king may be the more strongly bound to him in the future. And it then continues, quite strikingly, I believe, as often as the king ponders over the death of Roger's father, he is disturbed and mourns the more his valour and fidelity, and his long and praiseworthy services to the late king, and to him recur frequently and spontaneously to his memory. As it is certain that no one can escape death, fairly morbid thought, I know, for a Saturday morning, my apologies, ladies and gentlemen, but the king is consoled, and Roger ought to be consoled on his part, because there is good hope that his father, after the trials of this life, has now a better state than he had. Now, I find this letter very striking and very powerful, actually. I think there's a great depth of feeling here. I think it would be all too easy, in fact, to say, oh, it's exaggerated, it's hyperbolic, it's just a man, perhaps the king, seeking to console a son who's recently lost his father. Well, fair enough, it could be all of those things. But as I say, I think there's great depth of feeling. And I think that it situates us quite well at the start of the talk as to how the King of England felt about our man, Roger. He's clearly a very important and very significant individual at the end of his life to warrant such a description, such a eulogy, if you will, from the king. So just to make sure that we're all talking about, and I apologize about the marks on the screen, I don't know where they've come from, but the almost obligatory genealogical table for these talks, I'm afraid, ladies and gentlemen. But we have here our man Roger, married to Maud de Brieuze, and of course his male issue, sorry to the ladies in the audience. Ralph, Roger, and William will all be making an appearance. Ralph, of course, very sadly predeceasing his father. Roger of Chirk, Lord of Pencelli, later Lord of Chirk, will be featuring, as will William, at one point. And just to draw your attention, if you are interested in today's talk, I hope you are, or interested rather in Roger Mortimer, that there are some fantastic books available which mention him, although you'll notice that there is no biography, no monograph of our man Roger at this stage. Watch this space. Can I say that? Maybe I shouldn't say it. There is a typically brilliant essay in the edited volume by Anne Duggan here in Nobles and Nobility in Medieval Europe by Professor David Carpenter, entitled A Noble in Politics, Roger Mortimer in the Period of Baronial Reform and Rebellion, 1258 to 65, a period I'll get to in a moment. For anyone who is interested, if you're able to get a copy of that essay, I highly recommend it to you. Typically astute and brilliant from Professor Carpenter. And this is just to show you, to map out the structure for my talk this morning. So stage one, I'll be concentrating very briefly on Roger Mortimer's inheritance, 1246-47. Of course, his father, Ralph, dying on the 6th of August, 1246. getting too far in advance of myself there, but stage 2 will be on Roger Mortimer in that period of baronial reform and rebellion I just mentioned. Trials and tribulations there, and boy, were there trials and tribulations for Roger, as we shall see. And then in stage 3 with friends and fortune, and as I'm sure you're aware, anyone who knows anything about this, Roger knows that he had a central part, a central role to play, as it were, at the Battle of Evesham. My apologies to all members of the Simon de Montfort Society if there are any in or online. And the fortune that was, and it really was a fortune, ladies and gentlemen, made by Roger Mortimer, and indeed the other Mortimers of Wigmore after Evesham. So stage 1 then, Roger Mortimer's inheritance. I've already stated that on the 6th of August, 1246, Roger's father Ralph dies. And between February and March 1247, Roger pays the princely sum, and I'll use the word princely, of 2,000 marks to enter into his inheritance early, and thus swerving a no doubt very costly period of royal wardship. If anyone wants to know about that, they should look at Gilbert de Clare's troubles and woes with Henry III later in the 1260s. Oops. Oh, there we go now. Nope, we've gone a bit farther. There we are. That was just a bit keen. Back to stage 1, and then we're on the maps. Well, there we are. I've shown you the maps and also one of the tables that's coming our way in a second. This is just by way of reminder of the area. I'm sure I don't have to tell an audience such as this one, but just to give an indication of where Mortimer lands, typically at the start of the 13th and the end of the 13th century, can be found, as you can see here on the slides. Of course, the March of Wales. And here we have table 1 outlining Roger Mortimer's inheritance, the knight's fees of Ralph Mortimer regarding the honour of Wigmore. And really, there is not going to be a pop quiz at the end of my talk this morning, ladies and gentlemen. Don't worry, I mean, feel free to take notes, but I'm not going to ask you exactly what Simon Burley, except, well, the answer's easy, isn't it? But I won't ask you any questions anyway. But this is really just to make the point that the position of the Mortimers is very heavily, as you can see here on table 2, and I apologise, it's a huge amount of text, I appreciate, but it's just really to make the point of where the lands are largely based. He is a very important, very powerful, very significant regional power broker. There's no doubt about it at the start of his career, but a regional power broker, and that's all. Now, I couldn't resist, and I must thank my former colleague, Dr. Alex Wolf at the University of St Andrews for this, sending me this. It appeared in the Shropshire Star. It's out of date, so very sorry about that, February 15th of this year. But that's just to say that this here, buried, if you can see it, I don't know whether you can see it, among the trees here is Wigmore Castle. This is obviously where Roger and Maud would have called their, well, it's their principal residence, their caput, literally their head or their chief seat. And Rungwe Hafren, again, he also, Roger, very recent acquisitions by his father Ralph, receives the lordships of Melienith and Gwerthrynion. We'll come to Elvile in a second. And here we have the Gwerthrynion charters, which was studied brilliantly by J. Beverley Smith. Wonderful article on the subject, and also later references them with equal brilliance in his book on Llewellyn ap Griffith. And as you can see here, example of the lands being granted away by Llewellyn ap Griffith ap Llewellyn. The reference here to formerly Prince of North Wales to obviously Llewellyn Fawr, Llewellyn the Great, where he made to Ralph Mortimer and his wife grants of all the lands of Melienith and Gwerthrynion. Not to labour the point. Yes, I had to include a charming, I find it quite charming image of Llewellyn ap Griffith. This is at a fictitious parliament, circa 1278. Here we have Llewellyn, Prince of Wales, and here we have Edward I, sitting. They look quite docile, don't they, ladies and gentlemen? They look quite almost friendly, almost bored, in fact. One wouldn't believe that there was such animosity held between Llewellyn and Edward's father, or indeed Edward himself. It does appear, I think the original is from the Garter book, produced for Sir Thomas Wriothesley in circa, I think it's 1530. Sir Thomas Wriothesley sadly dies 4 years later, so he doesn't enjoy it, or doesn't get to enjoy it for that long. But we can, ladies and gentlemen, I just thought that I'd include it here. And again, also to state that we have Roger's marriage to Maud. So not only does he gain his inheritance from his father, he also has an inheritance by right of his wife, or Diuri Exoris, here from the Bruce line, and he gains Radnor by right of his marriage to Maud. He also, via Maud, gains claim to the martial inheritance, or gains a claim in the martial inheritance via his wife as well. So there's a great deal of inheritance here to look at. Again, I reiterate, he is a very significant and a very important power broker, regional power broker at this stage in his career. So we're moving forward to the next stage of my talk. Roger Mortimer in that period of baronial reform and rebellion that I mentioned, into some of the trials and tribulations. And again here, many books available on the subject. It's probably the most written about subject in the 13th century, dare I say it, yes I do, and drawing your attention perhaps to some of the developments here. But all constitutional change, I was once told, can be viewed, indeed, I was actually told it should be viewed, against the backdrop of failure in war. Now, what war? I'm talking about Lord Edward's war in Wales, his conflict with Llewellyn ap Griffith, the individuals that we just saw sat so politely with one another in that invented image. And this is just to remind us that Lord Edward actually had extensive lands in Wales, in Ireland, in England, in Wales, and indeed the Duchy of Gascony, but just focusing on the lands and the estates that he gained in Wales here, and in the Betheddelad, where, of course, it all kicked off, and the four cantrefi of the Betheddelad in North Wales of Ross, Ruffoniog, Dyfrdyn Clwyd, and Tygaingle, also known as Englefield. Here we have, I think, probably the first real association, direct association, tangible association for us between Lord Edward and Roger Mortimer in a charter, undated, but from internal evidence and from the copy that appears in the patent rolls, we think that it's probably late 1257 and early 1258, and that would seem quite likely given what Roger Mortimer is receiving from Edward. So as it says here, we, Edward, have given, granted, and by this our charter have confirmed to our beloved and faithful Roger Mortimer, that's our Roger Mortimer, for his homage and service, whatever right or claim we had or have been able to have in Elvile Uch Mynydd. Roger himself and his heirs performing thereafter or thenceforth for us and our heirs the service of one night in England, whenever the host will have been summoned to attend there, and the service of 3 nights in Wales, whenever the host will have been summoned to attend there. So here, I think we can see the arrangement being played out, be borne out by the charter. Really what's happening here in the context is Llewellyn ap Griffith, having entered the Betheddelad in North Wales, moves swiftly, and seizing it from Lord Edward, moves swiftly south into Idernion, down the west coast, into the Tywi Valley, and then actually kills Lord Edward's captain of war in West Wales, and in the march at that point, a man by the name of Stephen Balzan, during a sortie from Dinevor Castle. So is it possible here then, I ask the question, is it possible that Edward is seeking to replace his captain of war with Roger in issuing such a grant? It's a possibility. Clearly, the ratio of service here indicates where Edward is keen for Roger to lay his sights. It's in Wales by a ratio of 3-1 regarding Wales and England and the military host. Not to labour the point. So again, Elvile, just to remind you, is here buttressing Roger's position in and buttressing the lordships of Melienith and Gwerthrynion in, again, Rhyngrwy a Hafren, the Middle March of Wales. So Roger Mortimer's role in the march then, during the period of reform and rebellion in 1258 and 65, threefold really: a leading supervisor and facilitator of the Anglo-Welsh truces, at least between 1258 and 60, a leading custodian and defender of the royal castles in the march, that's to defend and maintain the region, and then, of course, a leading opponent of the Anglo-Welsh truces later. There is no peace treaty, ladies and gentlemen. In 1258, the story is, the 30th of April, 1258, the barons, the sworn confederation of the Seven, led by Roger Bigod, Earl of Norfolk, impose themselves upon the king while he is reportedly at prayer in Westminster Abbey. Henry feels the tap on the shoulder, turns, looks to see his barons, and says, "How now, my lords, am I to be your prisoner?" Some might say, how pathetic. Some might say, how prophetic. Leads directly to this situation here. There is no peace treaty in Wales. There is a truce. There is a cycle of that truce being broken and renewed. It lasts for 2 years. And as I keep saying, there is no peace treaty. And Roger, a marcher lord of all people, is responsible for supervising as an arbiter the Welsh truce. Moving on, Wilth Castle, which we'll get to in a second, in 1260, is in Roger Mortimer's, our Roger's, possession. He gains Hereford Castle to buttress his position there on the 19th of May, 1260. And then we have the great fallout after Wilth, which I'm coming to after July 1260. So again, just to provide an example then, Roger Mortimer here really acting as the conduit between the English crown on the one side and Llewellyn ap Griffith on the other, receiving writs directed to John de Lingen, Harlab Moirich, and Philip le Bret, the king's messenger, which had been delivered to Roger Mortimer, suggesting that if these individuals weren't already with Roger, they soon would be. So as I say, he's the linchpin, if you like. He's the middleman. He's that conduit between the crown and the Welsh prince. And then, of course, it all goes horribly wrong. We have the fall of Builth, 1260. I quite like this image, so I've had to include it, this illustration here of apparently what Builth Castle looked like 1277 or in 1280s when Llewellyn is said to have ridden past it. Quite how the illustrator knew that's how it looked like, I don't know. But then we have the reality, we're brought back down to earth quite literally almost here with the reality of the mound of Builth Castle. But we shouldn't let this image draw a shadow over the significance of Builth as a structure. It's a formidable stone-built structure situated to the east of where the River Irvon merges with the River Wye. And yes, it dominated the surrounding area and protected the route through Mid Wales. It's a very important castle, and as I say, it's in the possession of our man Roger. Llewellyn actually attacks Builth, makes his intentions fairly plain early on in the year. 10th of January 1260, Llewellyn attacks Builth, or his forces attack Builth. They broke off the attack siege before Roger Mortimer's and the king's reinforcements can arrive. Henry, obviously aware of Builth's significance, orders 100 marks to be made available to Roger, then the installation or the grants to him of Hereford Castle. And then, of course, Henry demands Roger meet him in London to treat with him on important business. And then 17th of July 1260, at a most inopportune moment, when Roger is then actually in Westminster, Builth falls. And the historian Dr. Adrian Jobson has quite rightly referred to this incident as having sent shockwaves through the proverbial Westminster village. It was a shocking development at the time. Henry, of course, I mean, the most shocking reason for this is, it comes to us from the Welsh chronicler, which is that apparently men of English nationality, and they were English apparently, Anglici Natione, betrayed their lord Roger and the castle to Llewellyn ap Griffith, we're told, for a very large sum of money. So it's the treacherous English are to blame, according to the Welsh chronicler. Who would have thought it? Of course, Henry doesn't agree with this interpretation at all, seeks to absolve our man Roger of all blame, has letters drawn up with the support of the March Lords in doing so, and then there's a very intriguing addendum added to the patent rolls, which is that the Lord Edward exclaimed against the said release. Why? Because as I showed you before, it's part of his appanage. It's Edward's castle that's then in the custody of our man Roger, and Roger has lost it for his liege lord. There is a Welsh campaign summoned. Of course, it doesn't get off the ground, hasn't got a hope in that happening, and baronial voices prevail. Henry III is forced to declare in a humiliating climb down that it's not necessary that we shall advance towards those parts with an army at present. So what does Roger Mortimer do in response? Does he race off, try and retake the rubble? No, he doesn't. He does what any good marcher lord worth their salt does. He decides to go and cause chaos himself. And here we can see a complaint by John de Brieux relating to Corfam Manor in the March, just about. John de Brieux brings a plea against Walter de Clifford, the Lord of Clifford and Erdesley, competing claims to the manor. Roger Mortimer seizes opportunity and takes the castle, literally with a bannered army. So this is not mere marcher feuding. This is him marching under banners for war with a multitude of armed men, Welsh as well as others, not of the king's allegiance or peace, or justiciable by the king. They are literally without his justice, and with many persons outlawed from the king's realm, attacked and took the said castle, etc. The king seeks for the castle to be returned. Roger eventually gives it up. John de Brieux doesn't get the manor, even though he brought the case in complaint to the king. That shows you what going grovelling to the king potentially could do for you. Walter de Clifford, in fact, gains the manor. Roger Mortimer, our man, in the case relating to Lechlade, an ongoing case, since the death of his grandmother in 1252, whereby he believed that he had been ousted from the manor. It had been seized from him per voluntatem regis, that's by the will of the king, unlawfully. The king and the crown, of course, decided that wasn't, in fact, what had happened, that Roger Mortimer had received the manor from his grandmother, who only had a life interest in the manor, and that when she died in 1252, it by rights reverted or escheated to the crown, which is what happened. And of course, to whom was Lechlade given? Richard, Earl of Cornwall, the king's brother. And then Denholm Young, the biographer of Richard, Earl of Cornwall, once said quite astutely that Richard never left the company of his brother, the King Henry III, without being the richer man. The case of Lechlade rumbles on. There's tension between Roger Mortimer, it seems, and Henry III over this case for the rest of at least 1262, into 1263. There's a suggestion in 1261 that there are robes gifted to Roger, whether or not there's going to be a reversal of the situation. But you can see here that Henry III effectively buys off Roger Mortimer, our man here, granting him £100 out of the farm at Bromsgrove, up until such time as the king shall have given him land of the same value, for which grant, very clearly, the said Roger released all his right in Lechlade. And it's after this point, of course, that our man Roger is once again firmly on the side of the crown. Surging forward then to the first of the two major events of the 1260s, we have the Battle of Lewes. Roger Mortimer is involved. It's a complete royalist defeat, baronial success under the leadership of Simon de Montfort. Lord Edward is imprisoned at Wallingford Castle. He's later moved to Hereford. Henry III is kept in Simon de Montfort's custody as his miserable cipher between the battles of Lewes and Evesham. Simon de Montfort effectively becomes the unofficial ruler of the kingdom. And Roger Mortimer, interestingly, and many marchers were to be banished for their part for 1 year and 1 day to Ireland. Some people have suggested, well, this is nonsense. This could never have happened. What would the purpose have been? Is Simon de Montfort trying to rid himself of these untrustworthy marcher barons across the Irish Sea? Well, actually, it seems quite likely that that was going to happen. 2nd of January 1265, our man Roger and others received safe conduct, dated from the 12th of January, same month to Easter of the same year, thence for 1 year and a day to go to Ireland with their households, harnesses, and goods. Roger Mortimer at this stage, via, again, Uri Exoris, by right of his wife, holds the lordship of Dunamay centred on its castle. There's a picture of Dunamay. So it would have been possible, potentially, for Roger Mortimer to have been sent to Ireland. Now, do we think that Roger Mortimer went to Ireland? Do we think that the Marcher barons went to Ireland? Of course they didn't. Instead, they involved themselves in the escape of Lord Edward. Escapes from Hereford, we're told by one source, by riding his horse flat out with his captors, his jailers. They, of course, riding their horses flat out too. Hops off one horse, has Thomas de Clare, the younger brother of Gilbert de Clare, Earl of Gloucester and Hertford, waiting for him with a fresh horse, hops on the horse and simply waves goodbye to his captors. That's my favourite tale, anyway, of his escape. Where do they go? They go to Wigmore Castle, suggest it, and they may well have met Roger en route, and they do meet, and they do meet one another, or they are together at Wigmore Castle, suggesting Roger Mortimer's direct involvement. And of course, where do they go then? Well, they come here, to Ludlow, where one assumes, predictably, that they form their own council of war to decide what to do next. And then, of course, the great involvement of Roger Mortimer, which most people know about, his involvement in the Battle of Evesham. One source actually refers to it as the murder of Evesham. For battle, it was not. Here we have an image for why it's called the murder, and here we have the proof of Roger's involvement. This is Simon de Montfort stating, "Our bodies are theirs, our souls are God's." And when the sides, and then the manuscript breaks off, and with his lance struck him through the neck, and it was Sir Roger de Mortimer, our man Roger. For he could be recognised by his armour and shield straps, and straightway all the knights of importance turned away from him, and then some others beheaded him, cut off his hands and feet, and riddled his body, long since dead, all over with wounds. And I apologise here, ladies and gentlemen, because I am very acutely aware of the fact that you are about to have your lunch after this session, but it does get a lot worse, and no such torment has ever been heard of. They cut his private parts clean off. Horrific scenes at Evesham where Roger Mortimer is directly involved. He is thought to have been the man at the head of a 10-man hit squad. His sole purpose was to acquire the location of Simon de Montfort on the battlefield and then kill him. Not just kill him, do this to him. And Dr. Sophie Ambler has very, very astutely pointed out, quite rightly pointed out in her book, wonderful new biography of Simon de Montfort, and referred to these as horrendous, well, they are, as you can see, horrendous scenes, and they are dark trophies. That's the phrase, the very memorable phrase that sticks in the mind of dark trophies. And of course, where are these dark trophies sent? Roger acquires the head, and I shall call them the unmentionables, and sends them to his wife, Dame Maud. What a lovely present, who is then at Wigmore Castle. And this has given rise actually to some speculation that Simon de Montfort may well have abused Dame Maud with these very parts that she then received, albeit it's speculation, it's fairly good speculation, but it remains speculation in any case. Now, can I just have a quick time check, please, Philip, just to see where we are? 20 minutes, fantastic. 15, 20 minutes, brilliant. Right, so we would like to see some charters. Fantastic. What happens after Evesham? Because, of course, everyone focuses on Evesham, quite rightly, because it's a despicable, horrendous incident. But here we have the Black Book of Wigmore, a brilliant source in the British Library. And as it says here, it's a collection of materials, writs, letters relating to the estates of the Mortimer lords and also their doings, in other words, what they got up to. And of course, it wasn't just, I should say actually that outside of the local, the royal, immediate royal family and circle, who do very well out of Evesham, it has to be said, none do so well among the barons, I would submit, than the Mortimers of Wigmore. And I say Mortimers of Wigmore, not just Roger Mortimer, because of course, we have here Maud, Roger's wife, who gains diverse lands and tenements, Brimsop, Gorlicksop, Thornbury, she gains Neen Savage. There are plenty of lands and estates which she gains. Again, leading to the suggestion that, or the speculation, probably more suggestion than speculation, that she was directly involved in the defense of Wigmore. Fantastic administrator that she was, and Castellan. And here we have a charter granted by Henry III to Ralph Mortimer of the Castle of Lyons Hall, just down the road, or up the road, and of all the other lands and tenements which were William d'Evreux, the Lord of Lyons Hall, who of course died at the Battle of Evesham fighting for Simon de Montfort's cause, which were forfeited by the king, or to the king, and as a result of William's adherence, here we go, to Simon de Montfort, Earl of Leicester, enemy of the king, ennemi du roi, which appears repeatedly throughout the Black Book. It is, after all, a Mortimer cartulary. And here we have just a brief picture of Lyons Hall Castle, sadly in ruins like so many. So what does Roger Mortimer get? Well, he gets plenty, in fairness, he gets plenty, among the manors. And here we're going to look at a case study very briefly of the manor of Marden. One of the three, Dilwyn, Lugwardine and Marden, that were previously in Simon de Montfort's hands. And Lord Edmund here receives it as a gift from Henry III after Evesham, then promptly gifts it to Roger Mortimer. Lord Edmund at this point becoming a very significant March Lord himself, effectively gaining much of Lord Edward's inheritance in Wales, of Edward's own free will, I should stipulate, rather than against his will, but he effectively takes up the mantle from his brother in Wales. And as we can see here, Edmund very clearly granting, given, conceded by this, our present charter have confirmed the manor of Marden, the county of Hereford, to Roger Mortimer with all its appendages, etc., rendering hereafter one pair of gilt spurs at Easter each year to the king and his heirs. That's a pretty decent deal, in my opinion. And we, Edmund and our heirs, will forever safeguard the aforesaid manor of Marden with all its appurtenances. So he gains the safety and the security and the protection of Lord Edmund, and also, as it states here, and I was mentioning fortune, and this really confirms it, for this our gift and grant, Roger gives 1,000 marks of silver. Now remember before I was saying that he gave 2,000 marks to enter into his inheritance early at the age of 16, to swerve that rather costly, no doubt, period of royal custody. Here we have 1,000 marks of silver being given in advance in hand for one manor. This is the level of fortune we're talking about after Evesham, ladies and gentlemen. Guarantees any shortfall. It gets even better for Roger. Not only does he gain Marden, he gains the promise days later, if not hours later, from Edmund, stating that he had granted and bound himself by the present text to the same Roger, that is our Roger, that if the manor of Marden, by the extent of good and lawful men, didn't amount to 52 pounds of land, then, because he or it shall afterwards have been lacking, he agrees then to provide for the same Roger out of our other Edmund's other neighbouring lands of the same manor in an appropriate place. Extraordinary agreement. Family loyalty and service. What happens to Marden? Well, Roger, when I first saw this, I almost fell off my seat at the British Library. This is a very rare beast indeed. It's one of the very few extant and surviving charters we have, or copies, I should say, because the Black Book of Wigmore is copies, not original manuscripts, but copy of a very important grant, one of very few remaining of Roger himself, granted by Roger himself to his son Roger, the Lord of Pencelli, later Lord of Czech, that I mentioned at the start with the genealogical table. And here he's granting Marden very clearly to Roger, alienating it to him for life, to keep it in a good state of peace, and that neither, and he states very clearly here, that neither I nor my heirs, that is, other heirs, not Roger, son of Roger, nor anyone in my name, nor their heirs would be able to exact or lay claim to any right or claim in the said manor of Marden. So here we see the trickle down, really quite beautifully, of royal patronage into Mortimer patronage, made very clear and abundantly clear by these charters. And Edward I also grants free warren to Roger, that's our Roger, no, excuse me, to Roger, Lord of Pencelli, later Lord of Chirk, the son of our Roger. And the context here is that it's 1286, so it is later. So the point I'm making here is that Marden remains with Roger, son of Roger, after the death of Roger Mortimer, our Roger. And he gains, he clearly still has it here, and gains the right of free warren, that is the right to hunt the chase in his lands in perpetuity or forever, in all of his dominion lands. So again, Edward here bringing Roger, son of Roger, closer into his own orbit of power, as when he was Lord Edward, he attempted to do with his father. If you recall, with that charter I showed you, first of all, with the lands in Elvile, Mynydd. And then moving on. Yes, there we go. And back to 1266. The context for this being the longest siege in medieval English history, from 21st of June to the 13th of December 1266, of course, at Kenilworth Castle, the former Montfortian stronghold, the great bastion castle in the Midlands. And it's done at the instance of Edward, of course, being granted to our Roger to have several rights at his manor of Clerbury and Chelmarsh, as we can see here on the charter. So concerning the manor of the aforesaid members, with the result that not any deputy bailiff nor official of ours may enter the manor or aforesaid members for purpose of making any stresses with regards to the tallages, and so it goes on, and so it goes on. And really what Roger is receiving here is what the Marcher Lords referred to as Marcher regality. These are Marcher liberties, fiercely defended rights. Walter Clifford, who I mentioned earlier, the Lord of Clifford and Erdesley, is said in the 1250s, to have been so affronted when he received a royal messenger with writ in hand, that he didn't even bother potentially looking at the writ. He simply took the writ, took the messenger, and forced the writ into the royal messenger's mouth, seal and all, for him to consume it. Now, I don't know whether you've seen a seal of Henry III's reign, but they are not small things, ladies and gentlemen. This is how fiercely they defended their so-called liberties. And of course, what did they claim to themselves? They claimed certain exemptions. They claimed the right to exclude royal bailiffs and royal stewards from their own lands and their Marcher lordships, but they claimed on the back of this, and this doesn't remain at Clerbury and Chelmarsh. These rights and prerogatives are extended by our man Roger to Norton, to Knighton, to Allerton, to Radnor, to Wigmore, to Kingsland, to Erdesley, to every manor he can get away with doing so. And he does get away with doing so. And they claimed exemptions. Roger claimed exemptions, and his bailiffs and stewards claimed exemptions for themselves from three things. First, from the King's writ. Why? Because, as we all know, the March was a land in which the King's writ did not run. That was the saying, even in the day. People were as upfront about it as that. They claimed exemptions from the King's justices, which means that the Marcher Lords were technically within their own Marcher lordships, that is, outside of the King's justice. They claimed exemption from the King's judges or justices. And third, and finally, and isn't it so modern, ladies and gentlemen, the Marcher Lords, including our man Roger, claimed exemption from the King's taxes. Because in the end, it all just comes down to money, doesn't it? Perhaps. Quite the career, I'm sure you'll agree. So by way of conclusion then, my main point really is to suggest to you that although Roger Mortimer is a very powerful regional power broker at the start of his career, he has made an absolute fortune in money, in estates, in lands, as have his family. And during his career, he propelled the Mortimers of Wigmore from the position of those powerful regional power brokers, which they absolutely were, and propelled them into the front rank of the English baronage. The successors of our Roger had much to thank him for. And I believe that probably means this Roger, it's worthwhile, shall I say, someone writing a biography of the man. I haven't put my hand up, you noticed that. I just said maybe someone out there somewhere in the ether, perhaps. And I shall leave you with this here. And I should say he manages all of that, in the spirit of the title of my paper, with more than just a little help from his friends And I say friends on the basis of the nature of this letter here, ladies and gentlemen, of his friends in very high places. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen, for your very kind attention. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Alistair. That was brilliant. Yes, as you know, actually, I do have every intention of taking up your hint. But I do have the small matter.
You heard it here first.
I do have a small matter of finishing a PhD first, which I've only just started.
Right.
So you can look forward to the biography of Roger Mortimer in about 8 years' time, I think. So allowing 6 years to complete the PhD and then to write the publication. But eight years' time, you can hold me to that. I would hope we have a published biography of Roger Mortimer. Because as you say, he is pivotal to the history of the Mortimer family in terms of propelling the family to the forefront of national affairs from their status of important regional barons, but by the end of his life, at the forefront of national affairs, and so pivotal to the history of the family. I'll try not to hog the microphone. Are there any questions for Alistair?
Presumably you can't ask the question and then put your hand up, Philip, as tempted as you might be.
Any questions?
Stunned silence. That's shocking. No, come on.
Yeah.
Yes.
Well, I thought you might, Ian.
Please.
Nature abhors a vacuum, doesn't it?
Hi, Ian.
Thanks very much for that.
No, thank you.
Looking, the way you've presented it, it's looking back on his martial, his active, I say acts in arms that are the reason for this loyalty, this great destiny here. But also, when Edward was out of the kingdom, Roger was one of the 3 regents of the realm, if I remember rightly.
Yeah, no, absolutely correct.
And when Edward I came back, if I also remember rightly, he was dismayed to find quite a lot of administrative things weren't going as they should have done.
Yep.
To what extent do you think he might have actually admired Roger for his administrative skills beyond his martial prowess and his courage on behalf of the royal family?
Thank you very much. It's an excellent question. I think you're absolutely right. The dominant theme of this talk, I'm afraid, given what Philip said earlier about the nature of the paper, it's not all about blood, guts and gore and violence, etc. You're so right to say that it's also administrative side of things. The theme of the talk, I'm sorry to say, is that it was about the violence and about the sexy stuff, if I can say that, because of the Battle of Evesham, etc. I think you're absolutely right. And I think potentially that even comes across in his letter, does it not? It's about service. That's the key word, service. And service isn't just going around beating people up. That's part of it. It's acting as a black bag man, in part, which Roger does and his bailiffs and stewards do on his behalf for the crown. Absolutely. And they are very good at it. We can decry what happens at Evesham, and absolutely right. And again, I apologize to all members of the Simon and Moff Society that may have tuned in. They don't like it when potentially you remind them of Evesham too often, but there we are. And Roger's role. But I think you're absolutely right. He is a shrewd administrator. And actually, I wouldn't necessarily say he's the shrewd administrator or the only shrewd administrator in the partnership. His wife, Maud, is absolutely hot, right? As in very quick. I was going to swear and then I realized I couldn't because it was pre-watershed. But she is very, very, very quick, witted, clever, brilliant. She's a fantastic administrator. She actually remains on at Kingsland after Roger dies there, which I think is quite, I don't want to get too soppy and teary-eyed and things, but I think it's quite, there's that side of it. There's the family side of it, there's the personal side of it, and then there's also the administrative side of it. She has lands there, but she's also having lands granted to her by tenants living in and around the area who are supporting her, whom she's supporting. She's taking on that role of administrator in that area, and she's doing it brilliantly. She has markets and fairs granted to her in her name. She has the license. Powerful widow, in the Middle Ages, or perhaps one just needs to say she's a widow in the Middle Ages. She's a very powerful woman, as many of them were, at least in the nobility. So no, I think you're absolutely right. I think it's a brilliant point.
If I can just add to your answer, Alistair, Ian is referring to the period when the the Lord Edward as heir to the throne.
Yes.
Sorry, I need to just move away from the loudspeaker, getting a bit of feedback. The period when in 1270 the Lord Edward goes on crusade.
Yeah.
And in 1272, his father, Henry III, died.
Yes.
And
16th of November 1272, Henry III dies.
When Edward went on crusade, he had named 5 people as trustees of his lands and estates and his children. By that point, his lands covered half the country. Yeah. But interestingly, when Henry died, Edward chose not to return to England. He was returning from the Crusades, but decided that affairs in Gascony warranted his attention more. And so there's this period, 1272 to 1274, when the country was governed by the trustees that he had put in place, 2 of whom had died. And so the 3 remaining trustees, including Roger, became the co-regents. And interestingly, that is a period that is very little research. There's only one historian who has looked at that period in depth, because most of the work loses interest. People who are working on Henry III lose interest.
Yes.
And people who are working on Edward I follow him on crusade into Gascony, and you get a paragraph that in his absence, England was governed. Yes. But also interestingly, historians differ, going back to Ian's point. Some historians say that it was governed very well, and Edward benefited from their period in terms of being able to then straight away implement far-reaching reforms. But others take a contrary view, that things had gone to pieces a bit in the vacuum. So that's certainly one period that I will be focusing on in my own research, as it is an area that is very much has been under-researched. Another question, Ian, and then Anne.
I think we just got a fascinating snapshot into Philip's PhD thesis. But absolutely, Philip, you're so right. It's not the first time, actually, that Edward, just by way of addendum as well, that Lord Edward's interests in Gascony caused problems. After he marries Eleanor of Castile, of course, Alfonso X's sister, at Las Huelgas near Burgos in Spain, where does he go? He's actually in Gascony, returns to Gascony and stays there for a while. There's a fantastic charter. Sadly, I haven't got it with me. I normally carry my USB stick. Anyone who is interested in seeing it, with people from the southwest region there and the Gascon lords. But please, I'm taking up question time.
Brilliant. Thanks for the talk, Alistair. Sorry it's me asking a question.
No, that's fine, Ian. You carry on, Ian.
But what a rip-roaring tour of Roger's career. It was absolutely fantastic. I'm just still very intrigued with this charter and the grant from Lord Edmund to Roger Mortimer in 1270 of Marden. Yeah. And was just wondering on potentially, do we have any ballpark idea of a date when Roger then cedes the land to his son, Roger of Chirk? And then by extension, a sort of quick question that we've already discussed a little bit, but is worth sort of just repeating here, is the question of, do you think that perhaps that charter is partial evidence, and particularly following on from the king's own letter that he sends to Roger of Chirk, that maybe both the king and Roger Mortimer are looking at making Roger of Chirk the successor at Wigmore, rather than Edmund, who eventually gets it?
Okay, yeah, well, thank you very much. The 2 fascinating questions there, Ian. Taking them in turn, the first one, perhaps first. Yes, well spotted, eagle-eyed, undated, as it is. Normally in these circumstances, what historians would do, as you know, is they'd go straight to the witness lists and see who's there and when particular individuals died. Of course, that doesn't much help us in this instance. We've got some famous people here, people may know. You know, the Dunster Castle, Sir Adam Gurdon, he appears as one of the witnesses. Fascinating, given the role he played, by the way, during the Second Barons' War, that he's there, given that effectively he would have been considered traitor for his acts. He's not the only one either. Grimbold Pauncefort, I believe, as well, may have some skin in the game too. So as much as elsewhere he punishes, particularly his tenant Henry de Pembridge, which I could talk at length about but won't, he also takes in these other people, who have, as it were, aggrieved the crown, committed crime against the crown in terms of, in effect, not quite yet, treachery, in effect, isn't it? But no, it's not dated, and that doesn't much help us. The best I can say is 27th of October, 1282, given who's granting it, and it is being done in his name whilst he's still alive, is probably a good terminus antiquae, as in that's the most solid data I can offer you. So it's definitely pre-1282. To me, given the fact that I think Marden's actually shifted on pretty quickly. I think the idea here is that Roger Mortimer wants to alienate an estate and build up his son's power base. It's not just his own, but actually that is building up his own. But if you see what I mean, trying to follow that line of patronage through quite quickly, from having received a manor forever or in perpetuity from Lord Edmund, then grants it off to his son. And I actually, to your second question, which neatly actually links in with your first, I'm sure that's not by accident either, is that in essence, the reason I say it could be earlier on is because this could potentially be before, getting my dates correct, the date of the death of the first son and heir, Ralph. If you remember, I showed you on the genealogical table, Ralph Mortimer, not the individual who preceded our Roger, i.e. who died on 6th of August 1246. I'm sorry to say it's either Roger or Ralph or Roger or Ralph or Roger or Ralph. But yes, but the one who was due to succeed him dies in 1274. And I think this is probably made in and around that sort of time, but certainly pre-1282 because of who's granting it. Yeah. Yeah, but I'm afraid I can't help you much beyond that, because normally we would look at the witness list, and they're all still alive. Most of them well into the 1280s and beyond Roger himself. So I'm sorry if that doesn't answer the second question. Thank you. Please.
Slightly on a tangent, but
Okay.
Roger,
son of Roger, Lord of Pencelli, later Lord of Chirk. Yes.
yeah. So what do you think in terms of temperament and learned experience he would have taken from his father, whose success depended so heavily on his relationship with the crown?
Yeah. Good
How do you
question.
think, what did his temperament and that experience leave his son with, do you think?
I think, well, if I understand your question correctly, I think talking about temperament, Edward is obviously encouraging him to behave as his father did when his father was alive. And the hope here in 1282 is that he will, as he says, recover in the son what he's lost in the father. Now, you could read that two ways, can't you? You could say, oh, well, he thinks that the son's probably on course to being pretty good, as good as the father. Or it's maybe he needs a bit more encouragement. Maybe he's not quite the great martial man as Ian referenced earlier, as I was trying to indicate with our man Roger, or even as keen an administrator. But I think that to Ian's question, to link the two together, is probably why it's, I think Roger is trying to get his sons involved. He's trying to build up that experience, both martial and administrative, to ensure that, as it were, the family business, if I can call it that, continues. That's the idea, isn't it? That's the whole point of legacy. That is Roger Mortimer's legacy in many ways. It's not just building up all this, this massive power base, buttressing the Mortimer's position in the Welsh March, but continuing, the ambition that he's clearly showing in England and elsewhere. And he clearly wants his sons to get on board and get on board quick, So I would say you could read it from the letter, you could read it two ways, but to Ian's question and to your second point, really, I think it's probably a good idea that he's bringing his sons in quite quickly and quite early on, and trying to build them up and to give them experience, which I think the point you're pointing at with your question.
And I think the other aspect of that is the personal friendship between Roger Mortimer and the Lord Edward I.
Quite right.
And again, that's an element that I will be exploring, is whether I can sort of dig under the surface a bit to begin to actually understand the nature of that relationship. Because obviously, what do we mean by friendship in the medieval period? Yeah. But there does seem to be formed a friendship between Roger Mortimer and Edward. And how can we begin to understand that? and the nature of it, and the mixture of friendship and patronage.
Yeah.
And so that will be an area that I'm exploring. Time for one more question. Sophie, is there anything on the chat?
Yes, there's just one that's just come in from Liz again on the chat.
Okay.
She's just asking how highbrow in bloodline terms the Mortimers were at this point, so that later the Yorkers could then claim some direct descent to the throne.
Right. How highbrow was that? Sorry.
In bloodline terms, sort of
Oh, in terms
what
of
was
bloodline?
going on at this point in terms of relationship, I think, to the royal bloodline. Or was it later, really, that there was a bloodline that the Yorkers could then call upon to claim?
Yes, I see what you're suggesting. There is a very faint whiff of Plantagenet blood, isn't there? If I can refer to it in that way.
I'm currently writing an essay that questions that.
Yes, well, I was going to say, but I don't necessarily want to say that too loudly because I might upset Philip. Such is the suggestion, because of course Tanglestel Goch is the name that I think Philip may well have in his head.
But no, at this stage, there isn't a clear
Yes.
bloodline with the royal family.
Yes.
That comes later
Yeah.
through the marriage between Edmund Mortimer, the third Earl of March, in 1368 to
Quite
Philippa,
right.
the granddaughter of Edward III.
Quite right.
And that was the key line of descent that Richard, Duke of York, relied upon to show a superior line of descent from Edward III than the Lancastrian one from John of Gaunt, the third son.
Yes.
But what is important here is that in terms of later Mortimer dynastic politics, the marriage between Roger Mortimer and Maud de Green. Sorry, I'm losing track. The marriage between Roger's parents, Ralph Mortimer and Gladys Thee.
Yes.
Gladys was the daughter of Llawen ab Iorwerth, Prince of Gwynedd, ruler of all Wales. And in Welsh genealogical tradition, the princes of North Wales could trace a direct line of descent back through King Arthur, Cadwaladr, and to Brutus, the founder of Britain, and through Brutus to Adam, the first man.
I told you I didn't want to upset him, ladies and gentlemen. I did say I didn't want to upset him. Maybe I did.
Now, again,
maybe I did.
One of the interesting things is to what extent Roger Mortimer himself, in the middle of the 13th century, actually is aware of that lineage and to what extent he uses it. Yeah. Certainly, one of the things that he is famous for is holding one of the first Arthurian-themed tournaments in 1279. So is that a sort of nod to through his mother, a nod to his descent from King Arthur, who, of course, in this period is a real figure in British history.
Yes.
And so is he actually claiming that lineage for himself? Certainly the later Mortimers did, and that was part of their dynastic politics. Yes.
It's just to reiterate as well, actually, to Liz, thank you very much for the question. It sparked a very interesting response, is to say that, I mean, again, the theme of my paper, really, joking aside, is that at the start of Roger's career, really, again, and I hate to say it as we're here gathered as Mortimer History Society members, the Mortimers of Wigmore are very significant figures, but they are regional power brokers. It's later, it's after Roger Mortimer, the Lord of Wigmore's career, really, where they are so much more than that. And that really is the point that I was trying to convey and trying to make, and I hope I hope
I conveyed it superbly well, Alistair. Thank you very much.
You.
So if we just give our thanks to
Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much.